Um, I had a fabulous time at a workshop yesterday where we discussed how to make good decisions. It was a privilege to be with such a composed, thoughtful, experienced, and determined group of people. The atmosphere in that workshop was diametrically opposed to the workshops one normally experiences with graduate or undergraduate students who really don't want to be there. But what I want to do here is take that decision context and focus down on one particular aspect, which is I have a consequence table, or I have an idea of what might happen if I undertake action 1 and what might happen if I undertake action 2. And I need to populate that little box with a number, and I don't have the data. And as I said yesterday, I would bet probably my younger child, because she's more trouble, but I would bet my younger child that there is no one in this room who has made any kind of even approximately complicated decision and had the sufficient data, knew all the information they had the evidence they required to make an unambiguous decision. It's a fiction. It's a fantasy. It doesn't exist. And yet we managed to fill that table with estimates, and many of those estimates are based upon expert judgment. And I want to have you today think about who an expert is, how to engage them, and then finally I'll show you what I think is a good news story. That's the purpose. So, expert evidence is essential, and typically the data are incomplete and the decisions are imminent and they're important. Let's presume that the decision makes a difference to something. You care, and the numbers matter. The estimates of outcomes matter. If that's the case, we can use our experts to tell us a simple verifiable fact, how many birds will be in that patch of forest if I do X versus Y, or predict the outcome of an event and explain my reasoning regarding my judgment about that event. If I ask my expert, well, what should I do? Then you get what you deserve, which is the expert's opinion and an expression of their values. And if an expert is going to do this job for you, they need to know you better than you know yourself. And it's not a smart question to ask of an expert. So we're just going to focus on the first two, estimating facts that are verifiable, at least in theory, and predicting the outcome of events. Now, I want to preface this by saying there is expertise. I don't want to leave you devastated by the fact that we've learned nothing, because that's not true. Experts in general, if you're conditioned per level of training and a bunch of other things, experts typically get closer to the truth than a person who is outside that domain of expertise. There are things that we can do remarkably well. If you want to identify a plant or a bird, you go to an expert who has done it many times and had feedback and correction and adjusted their thinking so that they become remarkably accurate at doing those things. That's not the question that we're addressing. We're addressing a question that says, well, this fact is not known, or indeed may not be knowable because it's in the future, or it's a circumstance that has never previously arisen. And as a consequence, I need to estimate it. And I can't know, but there is a fact, and I could eventually verify it. That's the sort of thing we're interested in. And experts disagree, and experts make mistakes. All kinds of experts, nuclear physicists, people who worry, veterinary scientists, ecologists, geomorphologists, financial analysts, they all make mistakes, devastating mistakes that they regret. So we know that they're not foolproof. And we know why. This is Herb Simon, got the Nobel Prize in 1959 for various things. One of them was this concept of bounded rationality, that people make judgments based upon limited information and cognitive ability. You may have evidence in front of you, but it is not a trivial thing to reason your way through disparate evidence and conflicting advice to a judgment that does that arrives at an outcome that if you gave the same evidence to a different good reasoner, they would arrive at the same outcome. You can present the same evidence to 3 different people and think, well, we're objective reasoners, we're dispassionate, we'll arrive at the same outcome. And of course, we don't. And we also have a limited ability to deal with time limits and to use the skills that we have to integrate the information to come up with a decision tomorrow or by next week or when the minister wants it. We also know, and this is another Nobel Prize winner, this is Daniel Kahneman, that judgments about uncertain situations, such as what will happen if I do X or Y, are confounded by, are coloured by a suite of psychological factors that have nothing to do with the fact of the matter. These things we are susceptible to, all of us are susceptible to, and we are largely unaware of them, and they largely are unacknowledged in our training of our future scientists. We don't teach our students that they are susceptible to this raft of things: overconfidence, framing, anchoring, and there is a host of fascinating experiments, highly repeatable experiments that could demonstrate to you and others just how susceptible you are to a bunch of things that you think, wow, no, that wouldn't be me, and it will be. So there's another problem. Whose evidence do you listen to? Which expert do you go to? Some of you have expert panels. You've got 3 or 4, 5 chums that you can rely on to give you advice about stuff that's relevant to the decisions that you need to take. And if you like to frame it like this, you can say, well, I have some alternative actions. I have some things that I care about, some criteria, some fundamental objectives, and I'd like to know the effect of that action on these criteria, because that will determine the decision I take. And yet, I don't know these things. I'll go and ask my expert panel. And they might consult, they might read a few papers, and they'll come back with an answer. Experts typically are defined by qualifications, experience, status among their peers, memberships, stuff like that. And there is a tendency to accept expert advice uncritically, and indeed less critically than we accept data, which is surprising. Law courts, judges will tell you it's difficult to challenge an expert's opinion, even in a court, even under cross-examination. There's a naked assertion that the identity of the expert warrants acceptance of the proposal. If they're sufficiently high status, we just go, okay. It's about birds. It's about birds around Cambridge. I just trust Bill. I love putting Bill in this position because he's everybody's expert in this concept. It doesn't mean that they're overbearing and difficult. A particularly beguiling expert is charming, wears a rumpled suit, kind of got grey hair, glasses at the end of his nose. Everybody loves him, and you just go, he must be right. He must be right because he's Bill. And he is the archetype of my favourite kind of expert. So there's a naked assertion that I would trust Bill, but that assertion is legitimate only if it can be challenged. And it is remarkably difficult to challenge expert advice. So we did some experiments. We worked on this for about 10 years because I didn't bring my phone up, so I have no idea how much more time I've got. Can someone tell me how much more time I have? 7 or 8, oh good, I'll get through this. We did some experiments. A guy called Roger Cook wrote a book in 1990, which was like yesterday. And in that book, he said, expert judgment is an empirical question. So address it empirically. Test people. And this went down like a lead balloon. People just don't want to explicitly test experts. It's difficult. Experts don't want to be tested. So we did some experiments. We got groups of people together within the domain of expertise: epidemiologists, veterinary scientists, weed biologists, frog biologists. Got them in a room, 10, 15, 20 people. We said, here's a list of questions. Are these fair questions? Are these the sorts of questions you are asked on a routine basis within your domain of expertise that you're expected to answer accurately? And they, after some toing and froing, they would say yes. Then we said to each person, write down how many of these questions you think you'll get right out of 20? And people would say, oh, I'll get 16 or 17. I'm not sure about those. Other people would say, oh, I'll get 5, 6. And then we got people to stand up and say who they were, as you would in a law court. Qualifications, publications, membership, experience, blah, blah, blah. And then we said to everybody else in the room, how many do you think that person will get right? We asked the person's peers how they thought they would perform on questions of fact. And the correlation between self-assessment, how I think I'm going to do, and peer assessment, how other people in the room think I'm going to do on questions of fact, was 0.85. These are deeply held beliefs about performance on questions of fact. We really do believe this in our bones. Then we've got to ask them the questions and see the answers. And this was the truly exciting part. The correlation between expected performance, either self or peer, and actual performance is 0. There is no probative value in knowing a person's qualifications, experience, or the esteem in which they're held by their peers. This has been repeated many times now. I got to this because we were asked, how do we know if you have the best possible expert advice? We were asked that by a government minister, and we said, no. We noted that an American project was started up, funded by the Office for National Security, who were interested to know whether they could have the best possible expert advice. And we spent many years experimenting, and there were 5 other university groups trying to find something about a person that you could measure or interrogate that would tell you whether they would be good at answering questions within their domain of expertise where the answer's not known. And the answer is there is nothing. If we could have found it, it was like a nugget of gold and nobody could find it. And they spent a decade looking and testing, trialing things. The only thing that kind of worked is a person's performance on questions of a similar kind previously. So Roger Cork, in his book in 1990, he was right. It's an empirical question, evaluated empirically. Test people. Okay. So who is an expert? You can't go by qualifications. After much fooling around, our answer is anyone who understands the questions, the theory, the data, the context, irrespective of qualifications, years of experience, or peer recognition. It opens the door to a much broader set of people whom you might consider to be expert, who can give you reliable judgments about facts that are not yet known. It can be a technician. It can be an enthusiast. It can be an amateur. You won't know, but they won't be. It doesn't hurt to have qualifications and experience. The slope is not negative. It's a good thing, but you won't be any better or any worse. Now, some of these people are very good, but you can't tell by looking or by questioning them about anything except similar things previously. So we also know, and we've known since 1907 from Francis Galton, that groups of people, when averaged, make a better estimate of a quantity or a fact or a future event than do individuals. And there's a lot behind this, and I won't show it to you because we're going to run out of time. So our approach was to get people who understood the questions, who understood the context and the jargon and the data, and ask them questions individually. I don't think this is working, never mind. So we recruit a diverse group of people, and by diversity we mean people with a diverse perspective on the questions at hand. We ask them a question. We get them to provide us with a lower bound, an upper bound, a best guess, and a measure of the surety with which they think their interval encloses the truth. We aggregate from this group the opinions, visually, usually, without attributing them to anyone. We discuss the reasoning that led from the evidence to the conclusion. We cross-examine with counterfactuals. We prompt different opinions and different perspectives. We introduce new data, we introduce different understandings of the question itself. And finally, when the talking's done, we get people to make a second private anonymous judgment. We find the mathematical average of those judgments, and that answer will give you a judgment that is more accurate and better calibrated than any individual that you might care to recruit. The worst way to make an expert judgment is to go to the best regarded person in the room and ask him. The second worst way is to get this guy and 5 of his friends to sit in a room and talk about it until they reach a consensus. And yet that's the most common thing to do. So you should stop. And in fact, if you're not doing this, I argue you're being professionally negligent. This is an example. I have to stop. We applied this to a bunch of to groups, estimating whether a claim in a scientific paper would replicate if the experiment were repeated. And by and large, groups interrogated in this way get it right. We can tell false claims from true claims. And that's all. Thank you.